The Spin-off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Estou passando nesse podcast para dividir uma informação que fez toda a diferença na minha vida. Quer fazer pós-graduação, mas tá impossível correr de um lugar para o outro?
Pois é, ainda mais com o trânsito.
Então você precisa conhecer a educação à distância do Senac. Sabia que é nota máxima no MEC? E tem diversos cursos de pós-graduação para te levar ainda mais longe. 100% online, sem necessidade de TCC e com acesso direto a todos os professores.
Ah, saber isso fez diferença sim.
Inscreva-se já na pós-graduação EAD. Quer saber? Senac EAD.
Toby Manhire? Oh, I loved your debate write-up last week. Oh, so good. Such great election coverage. Yeah, I just happened to be in the Spin-off podcast studio and I just wanted to say, great work.
Oh, I get it. This is like a Ponsonby Road bit. Tēnā koutou katoa, my name is Toby Manhire. This is Gone By Lunchtime on the morning of Wednesday, October 14, and there are only roughly 80 hours to go until the polls close, and we are going to podcast every one of those 80 hours. You guys all settled in. Ben Thomas, hello.
Yep, I'm ready.
Annabelle Lee-Mather, you ready to podcast 80 hours of lead up to the election?
I am indeed.
You can take the first 20 hours, Annabelle. Ben, you take the next 20.
Well, I've been prepping by not sleeping for 3 days, and during that time I've been giving Judith Collins media advice.
You've got a can of energy drink in front of you.
Yeah, it's a
you
V
do
Pure.
have the look of a man who is ready
Pure.
to go. Alice Webler-Doll, thank you for engineering our sound today in the absence of Tina Tiller. I've never seen anyone look happier than when Tina Tiller exited the studio this morning.
She literally skipped out the door.
So it's great to bring happiness to people again with Gone By Lunchtime. Already, more than half of the total number of people that are likely to vote have cast their ballots. It's very close. We can almost touch it. Today...
What's with all this early voting, though? It's like ruining Christmas. It's like opening your presents before Christmas. Why do you do it? You're not getting the full joy of the anticipation of polling day.
I agree. Ben, have you voted
It's
early?
so disrespectful.
I voted early.
How can you
I wanted to do the
destroy this?
I wanted to do the crossword in the Herald on Sunday.
Right.
So I thought I'll go and get my free pen and participate in democracy. But as it turned out, I couldn't because the early voting booth in the church nearest to where I lived was holding services.
And you had to stop and pray.
Foiled by God again.
Did you stop for a little chat with the guy upstairs?
Asked for some guidance. No, I didn't. No, the sanctity of the ballot box extends to the Almighty.
The task ahead of us in this, the penultimate Gone By Lunchtime of the campaign, is to do a whistle-stop tour of the parties and the campaigns. Then we're gonna pick a seat each, aren't we? That we're excited about for Saturday night. And then, ladies and gentlemen, using a combination of science and soothsaying, each of us is going to predict the results of the election. Do you remember I asked you to do that, Annabelle?
Yeah, but I'm not good at maths, so I don't know if it will add up to 100.
Well, then just say something about the Sant-Lag formula and the overhang, and everyone will think you're a
I think I'll do it more about
genius.
energy
Oh, yeah.
and
More the
vibes.
vibe? More the vibe?
Both.
Okay, energy and vibe. Thanks very much to Flick Electric for their support of Spin-Off Politics. Thank you to Spin-Off members who make it all possible. If you would like this humble podcast to continue after the election, please subscribe and review and say something gushingly complimentary about Annabelle Lee-Mather and about Ben Thomas.
Mostly about me, though.
Imagine yourself to be a normal person standing on the side of Ponsonby Road and just
Say what's in your heart.
spontaneously speaking from the heart. Let's start with Labour, shall we?
Wait, my mum's calling.
Oh, it's your mum. Put her on.
It's my mum. Hang on.
Hang on.
Hi, Mama, I'm just doing a podcast. Can I ring you back?
No, get her pick for Auckland
Can we have
Central.
a prediction? Auckland Central prediction and overall prediction. Sandra Lee on the phone.
Thank you, Mama. Bye.
No, put her on speaker.
Sorry, Mum says to say racing and fisheries was always going to bite Winston on the bum. Okay, there you have it from Sandra Lee.
Wow. Breaking news. Thanks, Sandra Lee, for your contribution.
Can we put special guest?
I think we can.
Text for
cameo appearance.
Yeah. That's the first politician we've had on, isn't it, this year?
It is.
I think we were planning on being a bit more ambitious.
Oh, you did demand politicians to be hauled up into the studio and interrogated.
They're doing interviews everywhere.
I know, but do you want more of them, or do you just want to hear more from Annabelle and Ben? That's what the people want. That's what they're telling me. Let's start with Labour. Labour. What did they do? They didn't do a great deal. They focused their campaign on, it was a bit like a John Key reunion. It was stable. It made Team Key look like an exercise in collegiality. This was the Jacinda Ardern campaign. There she was in the last week, incredibly powerful visuals being mobbed by thousands of people in Hamilton and on Victoria University.
That's right, Kelvin Davis and Grant Robertson crushed by the throng of people trying to get closer to Jacinda.
James Shaw sort of standing on the edge going, also me. What did you make of it, Annabelle?
I think this election, Jacinda's mastered the dark art of under-promising and under-delivering. I think it's, to use an old cliche, a campaign of two halves. We see people like Kiri Tapu Allen who have gone all in, boots on the ground, campaigning with their pants on fire and doing an incredible job. And then in some of the Māori seats, not all, we've seen quite a sluggish, lacklustre campaign. So from what I understand, Labour have been very good this time about using technology and information to target potential voters, and obviously some MPs are running really strong campaigns on the ground, and then others less so. But I mean, they're going to get back in. They'll get back in easily, so you can't argue with that, can you?
Ben, can you argue with that?
It's what we would have called a small target campaign, basically leaving as few vulnerabilities as possible. So, that very, very, very conservative tax policy, very strongly ruling out the wealth tax that the Greens have proposed. So that, to try and blunt Nationals' attacks and any uncertainty, amongst middle voters. The approach can be seen in an op-ed that was written by Helen White, the Auckland Central candidate, as a right of reply to, I think, Simon Wilson's column in the Herald, where she was given about, I think 500 to 700 words to lay out her case for why she should be the Auckland Central candidate MP. And there were 3 paragraphs in a row, which were basically the top 3 reasons are Jacinda Ardern is my leader, Jacinda Ardern wants us to win Auckland Central, and I have met Jacinda Ardern. And that's the campaign writ large across the country. If you the Labour Party in this election is Jacinda Ardern. It's all based on that kind of bond that the people of New Zealand formed during the COVID response, and everything else is seen as a distraction for them right now.
It's a continuity campaign, isn't it? And
they even busted out the old "Don't put it all at risk" banner, which Helen Clark used in 2005.
But the language, and there's some extent to which the language of the incumbent will always contain elements of this, but I've been struck by just how much of it is echoing the things that Key and English campaigns have used in terms of strong and stable, let's stick together. They haven't literally used the words "don't rock the boat," but they might as well have. That's the argument, and who can blame them?
Well, the thing too is that in that sense, National has run an excellent counter-campaign for Labour in that they look dishevelled and chaotic and like they're falling apart. So that whole stability argument is even more potent this time around.
Yeah. They played into their hands a bit. They've, in the last, I suppose we'll move on to national a bit now. In the last week, they've tried to focus their attacks on the old favourite, which is they're going to tax you this lot, focusing on the green policy, which you touched on, Ben, of a wealth tax, which has been pretty solidly ruled out. And as you say, that speaks to the successful strategy or tactic on the part of Grant Robertson to inoculate the whole tax issue by saying, here's our tax policy, done and dusted, let's not talk about it anymore. Jacinda Ardern has already ruled out the capital gains tax, which in a way is a surprise given that the roadblock to the capital gains tax was Winston Peters, who is not likely to be on the scene, so in a way it doesn't really cohere. And yet...
And of course we live in a vastly different world now with, this massive inflation of assets, which we've seen as a result of the monetary response to COVID-19. So more and more money chasing the same number of houses and shares on the NZX, which is exacerbating wealth inequalities, if not income inequalities in New Zealand.
So do you think that we should be disappointed, just staying briefly on Labour, Annabelle, with their campaign?
I think they've run a smart campaign, but I think people on the far left will think that it's a squandered opportunity for some real tax reform. Never has someone had such high political capital in recent times, and that she's not prepared to spend it at a time when it's so desperately needed, I think is going to see Labour lose a little bit of vote. Not lose a little bit of vote, but I think people will be voting for the Greens as an insurance policy to try and get a little bit of change in there.
It's the perfect campaign that you'd run if your goal was just to have another 3 years in government. As a strategist, that's what you'd tell them to do.
Sure.
You'd say crowd the centre, which they've successfully done. They've brought people over from being national voters to Labour voters, which is the dream of every centrist, centre-left, centre-right party.
And as Annabelle says, National have both encouraged and fed into that strategy really nicely, haven't they? I mean, I've just jotted down here. The year for the National Party, 3 leaders, an embarrassing miscalculation in the fiscal plan, leaking in the weeks leading up to polling day from your own caucus, all culminating in that Ponsonby Road tableau that you mentioned before, which often we can be accused of overplaying things, but this one, I think you have to remember that it played out as the lead item on the 6 o'clock news on TVNZ, which is the most viewed news product in the country, I would think it's safe to say, and is not a place that is prone necessarily to high drama. It's a more sober news outlet. It is the home, I would suspect, of the national base audience. And at that point in the campaign, that must have just felt like an absolute punch to the gut. So, given all of that, to finish in the 30s seems almost an incredible success when you just put all that down and look at it. I mean, it really rivals those terrible years that the Labour Party endured in the 2010s, doesn't it?
And part of the... Yeah, I mean, look, they haven't lost as many of those centre voters forever as they may have initially feared. They have started to lose, an increasing number of votes to ACT. But that block is still at about 40%, which means they've maybe lost 5% in the centre, which is bad, but it's not catastrophic for them. It has, I don't think that you would have to, be an empath of Jacinda Ardern's kind of standing to feel a little bit sorry for Judith Collins in this. She was not one of the people behind the Muller coup. She did not want the leadership before this election. I think, it seemed pretty clear she was positioning herself for a post-election bid. And she really got this kind of hospital pass right in the middle of MPs resigning in scandal, party grandees, being banished from public life, and this sort of internal caucus meltdown, none of which was really her fault. I think she's done a reasonably good campaign.
Annabelle?
I think she's been catastrophic myself, like a weird Muldoon-Trump mashup, and I think she's just completely read the room wrong. There's no appetite for spiteful politics this year. There's years when there's years when we love a good dust-up, like, Jenny Shipley and Helen Clark, everyone was into it. But I think after what we've been through over the last 3 years, people really aren't into nasty politics, and I think this week lashing out and calling Jacinda a liar, having a go at fat people, like it
feels like
it's just not the vibe.
You introduced for the first time in New Zealand commentary the game of two halves analogy a moment ago, and it's been a bit like that with National too. Like, you remember when we were saying, gosh, Judith Collins has been surprisingly kind of sober, and there was that period where in the first half of the campaign,
like literally 3 days, we were like, wow, look at Auntie.
It was
like,
more than that.
It
was more than that. It was more than that, and it seemed like a kind of consolidation period of just bringing people back and going, it's okay. We're not a loose cannon, even though there have been difficult. And then I don't know. It was as though after getting the accolades in the debates, after sort of narrow victories, call it what you like, in debate 1 and debate 2, arguably in the leaders' debates, you could see the energy raise, but then also in a way the kind of the sense of control and modulation fall away too.
So the arc for National, I think the turning point for them really was that second lockdown in Auckland and the outbreak, because I think a lot of people, including myself, would have thought the only real shot National have of getting the Treasury benches back is if there's another outbreak in the community that leads to another lockdown. And then that happened, and the government's popularity barely shifted. And at that point, you would start thinking, well, what can we do? What would change things? They brought out a pretty generous tax policy, didn't really change things. I think the timing with the debates is a little coincidental. I think it's more the fact that they're coming into this home stretch, they're continuing to bleed votes to act, and so the focus changes from trying to get those centre voters back to doing a bit more to reassure the what you'd think of as the solid National base, that actually you're there to fight Ardern and you're there to be in conflict.
So that strategy is to bring back the people who have abandoned National because they see ACT being a more aggressive and effective opposition. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, so people will abandon National because they want, a tougher opposition, more steel in the spine. And because there's no way that calling Jacinda Ardern a liar is going to bring over that person on the 50th percentile of the vote.
I think people are deeply, even National supporters aren't comfortable with those sorts of attacks on Jacinda, because I think right across the board there's in some cases a grudging respect of her, but a respect nonetheless. I think where National have gone wrong this time is they really needed to come on hard and strong with the economic stuff, and Judith needed to appear like she was right across every detail of it in that Helen Clark-esque manner, and A, she didn't do that, and B, she has a guy who's woefully underqualified for the job, so they haven't been able to put up a very convincing economic policy. And the truth is, even in those debates, you could see there's actually lots of common ground between National and Labour. Economics, a really strong economic platform is what I think could have made the difference. But just in terms of ACT, I do think that when people go into the polling booth, there is going to be a bit of a come to Jesus moment. And I think that a lot of National supporters who might be a bit annoyed or frustrated at with the party at the moment and are leaning towards ACT are probably going to come back and go back to Blue.
There is. I think there's something in that I think many of the people who answer the posters with ACT aren't necessarily full-throatedly supporting the ACT policy platform so much as marking down National.
Yes.
And that's always been the way with ACT. ACT has never had more than about 1% of the population that supports its full policy platform, and that's never how they've gotten their votes. But David Seymour has been, what someone was saying to me the other day, somebody that I would definitely mark as a left voter, said, Seymour has stood out in this campaign just because of the clarity of his message, the straightforwardness. If you ask National, for instance, well, what are you going to do about debt? How are you going to reconcile your spending and your tax and your debt track? And then you get David Seymour on and he says, we're just going to cut it. And there's none of that ambiguity and that kind of walking the line that National's trying to do.
I think you have to give him an A+ for the campaign that he's run. And I think, it's commendable that he has demonstrated how you can take a private member's bill and strategically use it to absolutely amplify the mana and credibility of your party.
He's also, just on a very basic level, speaking as a journalist who is an inbox flooded with media releases, the ACT ones are just better. The clarity of the message and that you mentioned about the wit, just the headlines. And now I realise that might seem a relatively kind of superficial thing to say, but it speaks to the nimbleness and cleverness of their political operating machine, and I don't think that that's nothing. Just briefly on the whole economic thing.
That's what happens when you've had Ben to advise you that way. You get those.
What are you saying?
You get those back in the day, the little bit of time that Ben spent with him a few years back.
That was
he took those nuggets of gold and he's
flowers have bloomed from those
nuggets.
Spun them into golden flower. Right.
That's
another way of putting it would be to say that the party's polling is now 1,600% higher than it was when Ben was working for them. But I see that you make a
Don't be like that, Toby.
No, I'm just stating facts.
Look, I think we need about an hour's historical context to accompany this.
I just want to say really briefly on the economic point, because I think that's a really good one. And I think that we have seen in recent history the ability of an effective national party, and the party of Bill English and John Key, as has been cited, dropped most recently by Jacinda Ardern and Grant Robertson repeatedly, the extent to which they've been able to just smash the Achilles heel of Labour, whether it's show me the money or whether it's Phil Goff not being able to explain part of his capital gains tax. And you've got to say that Grant Robertson, who's obviously an important strategist in the party too, has, over the course of the crisis and even before, when he was considered a little bit experience short in that finance portfolio, has done a kind of incredible job. He seems at the moment invulnerable on that front. He's got the support of the business community. Obviously, there are people who are disappointed by the level of the tax policy, but it's been really good. And whereas National, it's almost like they needed a Dr. Shane on the economy, right?
They need to clone Dr. Shane. He might even know how to do that because he's a doctor, and then just give him all the different portfolios.
But it basically, there's no Dr. Shane. There's no one who can effectively condescend to Grant Robertson on matters economic at the moment, it seems to me.
No, Robertson's really established himself. He's worked hard in that portfolio and sort of come to grips with it, a lot better than at the start of that term. Look, National, I sometimes wonder about whether you need these fully costed plans, because they're actually a lot of guesswork. When you're talking about the debt track and where government spending is going to be in 10 to 15 years versus debt. Yeah. I mean, it's all just an exercise in imagination.
It's like a game show for accountants. I quite like it.
Yeah.
We've done.
It's an immersive role playing game.
Kia ora, I'm Sophie.
And I'm Simon.
And I'm Alice, and together we host the Spin-Off's food podcast, Dietary Requirements.
Join us each month as we explore a vast culinary landscape, from the gourmet
Ooh la la
to your more hearty tucker.
Kiwi onion dip, anyone?
Everything's on the table in Dietary Requirements.
Subscribe wherever you listen to all your other favourite podcasts.
We've talked about Labour, we've talked about National, we've talked a bit about ACT. What about the Greens?
Well, no, I want to...
Oh, wait.
Two more national
We've
things.
got two more national things.
Two more national things. The first thing is...
From Ed Thomas.
The first thing is I think the Greens wealth tax is actually, the attack on the wealth tax is actually, that's a totally legitimate argument for National. The Greens are right that it has, that you can't just refuse to you can't just rule something out before negotiations have started. Labour are right that presently their position is that they've ruled it out, and National is right that it is a possibility. And when I was in the Key government, there was this rule of thumb that every time Russell Norman appeared in the first break of TV1 News, National's internal polling went up 2% for that night. And so, the Greens are sort of, this lovable kind of thing. But they do actually, for a lot of middle New Zealand, they do have this spectre of very socialist. And so this is actually a time-honoured and traditional and reasonably well-thought-out attack by
And I
National.
think that strategy also has a little kind of useful sort of sidecar on it, which is if it can help to push the Green vote down a little bit, then that, if the Greens were to fall to 4.5, then whether they win or lose, that's still better for National because they're going to get more seats out of that, right?
Although, I would think you're targeting different voters there. I doubt that.
I'm not saying that's the route one. It's just a little. But you were in full flow when I interrupted you.
And the other thing is that it draws Ardern basically into denying what Collins is saying, and that's what Collins is really trying to do. She's trying to bring this into a two-way dialogue between her and Ardern, so that ACT are cut out of the picture a little bit, and you're thinking about two major parties. The second thing is the fat stuff. When
is she going to go after the people in wheelchairs? Are they next?
I may have chosen to be fat, but I didn't choose to be part of fat discourse. Nobody wants to talk about this stuff in an election year, and you're in a losing position if you're the leader of a major party and you're just starting to talk about why people are fat. New Zealand's a pretty fat country, and it's getting fatter each day. It's not a growth strategy for your party.
Ill-disciplined to be in a position where you're in the final days of campaigning and your appearances in news media are defensive. You're on the defence. Yeah. That's. You should be on. It's just should
be on the attack against fat people. They're slow moving. You can get the jump on them.
The Greens. Annabelle Lee-Mather. Do you feel as though the Greens have played it reasonably cautious? And I've been critical of that a bit. Maybe I was wrong because their polling seems to have held up. They are obviously still suffering a bit of PTSD from last time round when everything was a sort of nightmare, and then they had the what looked like another round of it with the Green School scandal and James Shaw, and they've kind of run a campaign, and I think they've even, I don't know if this is a direct quote, but it's like basically Jacinda Plus. We are offering you the Jacinda you thought you knew.
I think that's a really smart line, but I have to say I've been underwhelmed by the Greens campaign. While I think, Marama Davidson is a remarkable candidate, I think the party at large haven't run a strong campaign, and I have to say I'm particularly disappointed with the campaign they ran in the Māori seats. They only stood 3 candidates this time. Last time they stood 4. I don't understand how after being in Parliament for 25 years or whatever it is, that you're still not contesting all of the Māori seats. I was quite concerned when I saw clearly the lack of preparation and support some candidates have been given. And in seats where the Green Party in the past has polled very, very well. I've mentioned before that, Te Tai Tonga has quite a strong Green support base. Ben says it's because of Matidi. It's actually not. Like Dora Langsbury did really, really well in the two elections that she contested Te Taitonga. Sometimes they even come second in the party vote. And while the candidate they stood this time is a really lovely, smart wahine, it was clear that she hadn't been given the support and the resources she needed, particularly from a media perspective. So definitely not the strongest performing of the parties. I think both ACT and the Māori Party have run a much stronger campaign than the Greens.
The Greens are a bit anonymous, I think, following COVID. They really sort of fell into line. And then I think, that contributed a lot to those sort of UMR poll numbers that were coming out, sort of suggesting that they were very, very borderline and maybe even below the 5% threshold. They've come back a bit, thanks to this. It's a really interesting strategy if you contrast it with New Zealand First, which is defiance to the end. Actually, we're a strong party. Actually, we're going to be back. Whereas the Greens actually lie prone on the ground and are sort of like, don't let them hurt us. Please give us your vote. Like kind of woodland creatures, just sort of curled up in a defensive position, but presumably that plays well with their voters, because I think there is a floor of about 5%. So
look at the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals branch.
Pretty much, it's just it is strange. It is strange because
I've criticised them for being too polite in the past, and it seemed to me there was a lot of terrain that there was there. But I'm willing to entertain the possibility that I'm completely wrong about that, because if you look at New Zealand First with its mixed messages and its confusion, and they're in the doldrums in the polls, we know how hard it is historically to get. I think Winston Peters is keen to contradict people who say that no party has got back into power after being supported government, but no party has got over the 5%. Yeah. Thank you, Ben. Jinx. And the Greens are on course to do that. So that is an historic achievement. So, they've
literally been poles apart, haven't they? The New Zealand First campaign and the Greens campaign. And I think Audrey Young is right when she says that basically, Winston Peters has miscast himself this election. He's come out like a angry old grizzly bear out of hibernation, irritable and annoyed, instead of crumping all over the mana of Jacinda Ardern and the Labour government. He's come out swinging violently against them. I think he would have been much better to play the elder statesman role, the safe pair of hands. We're the hands of experience. We're going to support the next government. But instead, he's come out grumpy, cranky, AF, completely sort of tuck ahead on the mana of the relationship that he had with Labour. And with the Greens, we've seen the opposite. And I have to say, I do think that line about, vote Greens and get the Jacinda you wanted is a smart line, and probably something that, New Zealand First could have drawn on in a different way.
New Zealand First is fascinating, and it's been fascinating for the last 27 years. I think that's right, and it's not. In a way, he has done some of that. He has said, "I'm the one who brings the experience in working with Jacinda," and I'm going to read what he said this morning on the radio in a second. But he's tried to do all those different things at the same time, and then the slogan, I think, is "Back Your Future." Is that right? Or is that
Back Your Future?
What does that even mean? I mean the kind of incoherence in the message, even if the message is, I'm going to give you an even bigger gold card. It's going to be the biggest gold. It's going to be like one of those comedy checks on a game show gold card. I'm going to, what is the thing? What is he selling? What is the, there is no sense that there's actually a policy promise that is attractive, whether it's a philosophical, ideological position or just a thing, just a card. That has been the thing that has worked for him in the past.
I think he threw all of his chips in with the handbrake strategy, and I think that could have worked if it still looked like Labour would need both minor parties to form a government. At the point at which Labour hit 50% in the polls or whatever, and it became increasingly likely that they could either govern alone or just with the Greens, the handbrake the handbrake argument.
Or if
I don't know if
Labour
I
had-
agree with that, because I feel like Labour hasn't even promised anything big enough
Well,
or
that's what I was gonna
exciting enough
say.
or polarising enough to warrant a handbrake.
If Labour were still pushing the capital gains tax,
Yeah.
then maybe if they were pushing a sort of seriously big ramping up of the top tax rate, then yeah. But
Can
because
I
they're
just
so,
say, my mum says too that that fisheries and racing were always going to come back to haunt once.
Interesting. She mentioned that earlier.
She did. Just wanted
it's
to
just getting
remind
that back in
everyone.
there. Well, I mean, look. I'll tell you what. One of the other interesting things when we talk about New Zealand First, which possibly links to that, or probably doesn't, given that the New Zealand First Party and the New Zealand First Foundation are completely separate, is that you would have thought, you would have expected that charges being laid by the Serious Fraud Office in relation to donations to the New Zealand First Foundation would be a huge story in this election campaign, and it kind of wasn't, right?
Well,
it was like
it's
24
separate.
hours and see you later.
Separate, Toby, that's why.
Oh, because
Yeah.
it's completely...
Separate.
I
Just
said
had the same name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, two different stories, but I can see where the
right.
confusion
Oh, it's not even
arose.
really an
Yeah.
election
Because
story. I see
you
now.
thought, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's really just about a gentleman's charitable club.
Yeah. Well, that's another area where I've completely misunderstood.
Yeah.
So thank you for clearing that up. Can I read you what I just was interesting to listen to Winston Peters this morning on the radio, and he was asked right at the end of the interview by Corin Dan. He was given an absolute blank page. He was said, "Why should New Zealanders vote for you?" And I thought, well, this is kind of this is a question that it's sort of obvious, but I'm interested to know what his answer is. And this is what he said. I mean, it's not massively funny, but this is what he said. Because the decisions they make this time, if they make the wrong decision, will be debt and cost in our grandchildren's mouths. We will never get past it. We need to have plain, clear-headed, business-sensitive common sense and experience in government for 3 years under a stable government with Jacinda Ardern. With all this crisis, I think we did a sterling job. The Prime Minister gave the leadership and we got on with doing the job properly. That stability is needed for the next 3 years, and that's why New Zealand First is the only insurance for so many New Zealand voters to take out in their second vote. And I just thought, what a single person. You were given an absolute... like, you can't blame the media for ganging up on you. You can't say that you've in some way been skewered. You had an absolute open stage there. And I don't think a single person would listen to that and go, I'm going to vote for you.
That's a compelling argument. I have no idea what it means.
It's you're almost sort of expected to segue into, they say you're vulnerable, but you're not vulnerable. I mean, you're vulnerable to COVID.
Anyway, we should crack on. I don't know. We should quickly talk about the Māori Party, perhaps.
Yes, we should definitely talk about the Māori Party.
It's in play. They're back, baby.
They polled in the last Commonwealth Brunton 0.2, but I wonder whether that is in part because their strategy has seemed to, in the last few weeks, push very strongly on the you will get more Māori MPs if you give us your candidate votes, and then you can vote for Jacinda.
The irony is that the National Party's strong team slogan would have actually been better for the Māori Party, because by and large they've stood some really impressive candidates who have done a great job. Who would have thought this time a year ago that they could be so close in 2 or 3 of the seats? I think...
Who would have thought that you would be saying that you would have a very strong team with Debbie Ngaruapaka and John Tamihere in the co-leadership compared to... I mean, but it's true, right?
Even John has shown a lot more discipline than Judith. He's a guy who can shoot from the hip, but But even he's done a really impressive job this time.
And that profile has him running really close in Tamaki Makaurau.
He's quite close. I don't think Penny's in danger. But what I think is interesting is there's been this long-running narrative in the Māori seats that Māori are just blindly loyal to Labour, and we're like the beaten wife that goes back and votes for Labour every time. In my opinion, nothing could be further than the truth. If you look into Tai Tokerau alone, in the last 30 years, they've voted in 4 different candidates from 4 different parties. What other general electorate do you see that amount of churn in terms of parties? I think Māori voters are ruthlessly strategic in the way that they vote, and I think the Labour Party, the people that tend to forget that is the Labour Party. And I think what we're seeing here is a clear message that the Māori MPs are being put on notice not to take the support of Māori voters for granted, because next term, next election, if the Māori Party hold fast, we could see some of those seats start to flip if Labour doesn't start really delivering to Māori.
And one of the interesting things on that is that, of course, the Labour candidates, whereas last time they played a all or nothing.
That's right.
Now they're on the list, and we're going to talk very quickly, because we are running out of time, about seats that we're interested in. And I was going to mention Tamaki Makaurau, and that's one where the polling that was done by Curia for Māori TV had Penny Henare on 44, John Tamihere on 36, Marama Davidson on 18, which she'll be disappointed by. But what we don't know is how that's tracking, whether how much different that would have been 2 or 3 weeks before. I don't think Tamihere's out of that race. Like, 8 points is not nothing, but there's a significant undecided component in there. And I touched on it, but I do think that there is, and I do think it's quite a compelling argument. It's like 3 for the price of 1. That's the argument that he can run. I think that voters in Māori seats are probably more tactically astute than in many other seats.
Yeah.
And given that before, the last time round, Penny Henare wouldn't have been in Parliament if he hadn't won that seat. Now they can say, look, you want to keep the Māori Party alive in Parliament, and you get another Māori MP. I think that one is not. I think that one is still on. That one is still alive.
I feel like the Labour Māori MPs got their strategy back to front last election to this election. I feel like last election they should have gone on the list, because Labour was pretty, it was pretty unclear how it was going to all wash up for Labour. I think to put themselves back on the list this time, I feel like it's really taken the edge out of their campaigns. It feels like the Māori Party candidates and Māori in general seats like Kiri Tapu Allen are campaigning with their pants on fire, and we're not seeing that in the Māori seats this time. And I think that the 2-for-1 argument, especially in places like Te Tai Hauāuru, is compelling.
Ben, did you have a seat that you were excited about?
I'm pretty interested in Whanganui. I think there's a lot of marginal or traditional sort of bellwether seats that will be in play that people haven't really talked about too much. I think Northcote is one where there's a big possibility that Shannon Halbert, who's been sort of knocking around the electorate, sort of in contrast to somebody like Helen White, he's very visible between elections. He stood in the by-election against Dan Bidwar. By-elections are a bit funny in terms of looking at the margins, but Northcote was a Labour seat before Jonathan Coleman. And so it could go red as well.
Yep.
But Whanganui will be interesting as well. Hariti Haipango is currently the national MP there. Pretty slim margins, so I think it's likely that she will lose, Labour. And that I think Steph Lewis will become the first Labour MP in that seat since Chester Burrows retired.
I think just in terms of
very good.
Just in terms of Shannon Halbert, I think he's one that he's worked so hard over the last 2-3 elections, Ben, that he stood for Labour, and he runs a phenomenal ground game, and I don't think that's been reflected by the list rankings that he has been getting. So I think people are watching those Māori candidates. I mean, Kiri Tapu's another one. She massively eroded Anne Tolley's majority last time, and yet this time around she's been demoted on the list. So
this is East Coast you're talking about now. The East
Coast, so it's kind of it's how do we get fresh Māori talent in there, people who are working hard, who are taking campaigning, who are knocking on doors seriously when they keep getting these really bung list placings.
Also,
I think you risk losing great talent.
If you're talking about the 2-for-1 deal in terms of increasing Māori representation, Kiri will be back in on the list for Labour. Tanya Tapsell, who's probably one of the best new recruits for National, is out if she can't win that electorate. So, that'll definitely be one to watch as well. The other one to watch will be Botany. Not for any particular reason. Christopher Luxon will win it by about 50,000 votes. But it will just be nice to officially mark Jamie Lee Ross no longer being a Member of Parliament and gone from New Zealand public life forever, except when he puts on his tinfoil hat to do more interviews with Alex Jones or Prison Planet or the Parole Board.
Yes, Jamie Lee Ross was on Steve Bannon's show the other overnight as the Advance Party sings its last song. East Coast, you mentioned, Annabelle. Do you think that one is? I'm just having a look at that.
I think that one's in the bag. I think it's in the bag for Kitty this time.
4,800 majority though for Antoli last time. It's not nothing.
No, but she's standing down, so it's a clear playing field. I think Kitty's run a really strong campaign. She's very visible. She's familiar to the electorate now. It's not like a stranger. I think Tanya's a remarkable young candidate as well. Either way, they're spoilt for choice there, but I am picking that Kitty will bag it this time around.
It seems like Kerry Allen is also on track to be in cabinet. I think it's a safe bet on were in the unlikely event that Labour were to come out on top in the election in a few days.
The other interesting seat too will be the far north, not in terms of Shane Jones, but in terms of how well Willow Jean does in terms of eroding that national support there. She's another hard-working Māori MP.
Northland was only won by just over 1,000 votes by Matt King when he unseated Winston Peters, who had won that by-election. But Shane Jones is just out of it on the basis of we've only seen one poll, but just a reminder that the poll put him on 15%, King on 46%, and Willow Jean Prime, who has been, has contested a number of elections up there now, and is obviously, she was very impressive on the News Hub debate. I thought she's on 31. So whereas that was looking like it could be an exciting seat. So what's the difference
between her and Matt?
She's 31, he's 46. So it's still a way to go. Hey, should we do predictions?
I'm not sure that betting your entire party's electoral future on Shane Jones's capacity for on-the-ground campaigning and door-knocking was ever a great idea for New Zealand First.
Some free consultancy advice there. Should we do predictions? Who wants to go first? Ben?
I think everyone will have a good time.
You think your prediction is that everyone is going to have a good time?
Yeah, except Jamie Lee Ross.
Do you want me to do my prediction then?
Sure.
Let me see. I put it here on my mobile telephone. My prediction: New Zealand Labour Party 60. Oh, this is a prediction for after special votes. By the way, not on the night, not on the night. So
just add another layer of complexity.
If you need to tweak your algorithms at all, there. My prediction is New Zealand Labour Party 62 seats. 62 seats.
62 seats.
62 seats of the 120 seats. The New Zealand National Party 40 seats. It's 40 seats. ACT New Zealand 10 seats. And the Green Party, 8 seats, and that's it.
That's I say, it's going to be really weird for David Seymour, eh? Going from being a one-man band to having some homie Ds. But I also think, we might see what we've seen in New Zealand First and other minor parties in the past where you bring in all these people who weren't really expected to get in, and then you have some teething problems. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for those guys.
I think it'll be a wild ride for the next 3 years for that caucus.
Do you want to give us your prediction, Ben? Please?
Oh, I didn't quite. I worked it out as percentages before.
Well, you could do it as percentages if you
like. I didn't actually work it out so that it. So
what do you need, Ben?
Because I'm trying to math.
I just want listeners. I want you to know that I did ask Ben and Annabelle to come prepared. I feel as though they've let you, the listeners, down in real sense, Ben?
I would say it'll be around Labour 47%. 47%. National about 32, 33, 32. What does that take us up to? 69. Is that right? No, 79. 79, Act 8, Greens 6, and 7% wasted vote.
Okay, so let's just tell me that again. You said Labour
40. Maybe higher than 47. Maybe let's call them 48.
48. Hope you're enjoying this tour of Ben Thomas's political
Mind
brain.
palace.
48 for Labour. What did you say for the National?
National 32.
32. I'm using the Electoral Commission's calculator for the Greens.
6.
6. And for the Association of Consumers and Taxpayers New Zealand.
8.
And no seats for anybody else? No Māori Party seats? Anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No, I would ideally love for the Māori Party to win a seat, but I don't think it's going to happen.
That means that your prediction, the prediction of Benjamin Thomas, is 61 for Labour. Can I go right there? Oh, you've already done this then. Ben is 61 for Labour and 41 for National and 10 for ACT and 8 for the Greens. Annabelle Lee-Mather,
Okay,
sing us out.
I'm not going to do mine using numbers. I'm going to do mine using pies. So I reckon Labour's going to have lots of pies.
Lots of pies. Hang on. Yep, lots of pies.
National's going to have significantly less pies than Labour.
Significantly less pies. Yep.
Like at least a third less pies than Labour.
Okay.
Maybe more.
Third less pies. Okay.
ACT is going to have more pies than it's ever had in its life.
More pie. Yep.
But not as many pies as it thinks it's going to have.
Okay. Yep.
The Greens will have like slightly less pie than last time, less pie than they had hoped for.
Less pie. Yeah.
But it'll be made using seasonal vegetables. And it'll be gluten-free, so delicious, delicious and desirable nonetheless.
Okay.
The Māori Party is like baking a mean-as hangi pie. It may or may not be served in the wharekai this election. It may end up being dessert next election, we don't know.
It's a future pie. Okay, I've put those into the calculator too. And Annabelle's numbers are Labour 64 pies, National 38 pies, ACT 7 pies, and Greens 6 pies. And we will see how we did another day. Thanks both very much. We're going to catch up on Sunday. I've promised that we'll have champagne to celebrate the end of the forever election. And we'd strongly encourage you too to have some champagne or kombucha.
There's not even going to be any scandals anymore. Like nobody can be bothered like sexting like an inappropriately aged like staff member or anything.
Like
everyone's
they've thought
exhausted.
About doing,
Nobody's having affairs. Like no one's leaking anything. No one can be asked.
Maybe they should just in the last campaign just have play a game of Uno or last card or something
last
instead.
Card, yeah. Presidents and assholes.
Just like we're done. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Alice. Buy a tea towel. They're good. There's only a few left. We've nearly run out of tea towels. You know that?
Because they're so incredibly
popular.
popular.
People are just loving drying their pots with Ben Thomas's face. I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government. a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the 4th Labour government. Made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Talofa lover, I'm Madeline Chapman, editor at The Spin-Off. If you have the means, consider supporting our high-quality journalism by becoming a Spin-Off member. Sign up now at thespinoff.co.nz/donate.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.